this one, just because it's kind of simple. Okay, so it's white to move. This is one of those trebuchet ones. So the point is, if you play king c6, you actually lose, because king e5, then your king has to move away from the pawn. So you have to play a king, I don't know, somewhere, and then I take and then I win. So the way to win this is you play king c7, and then after king e5 forced to defend the pawn, now you play king c6. And now you win. Because now the king has to move away from the pawn, and then you win the pawn. So you have to go like king here or something, and then you win. So the trick is not to go here, because then you have to move away. It's like a mutual zugzwang. You go here first, and then you get this position with black to move, and now you're winning. So this is actually a fairly common trick, by the way. And I don't know if I've told you guys this already, but I had this position once over the board game. It was something like this. What was it? I think it was like this. Or no, let's see. It was like this. Yeah, it was like this. Sorry. It was like this. So it was kind of similar, right? So the point was that it was my move here. I played here or something, he played here. I played here, and he actually resigned here. But this is actually a draw. So the point is, since the king can actually get in front of this pawn, it's a draw. But the only move that saves it is you have to play king f7. So that after king takes pawn, you can play king e7 and take the opposition. And now white can't make progress. King d5, king d7. And then e5, king e7. And then e6, king e8, king d6, king d8.
Check.
This is just a draw. But yeah, the guy actually resigned that position. Because I guess he thought he had to play king e7 or something, but then this just wins. Because now I have that position. It's black to move. So now here, and then white wins. Promote the pawn. So that's kind of related, I guess. It's kind of related. So yeah, it's better that the king is actually, the king is forced off the pawn, but it can get back to e7 in time. So that's a tricky one, I guess. Okay, so something that's kind of similar to this one, in a way, is this one. It's a similar idea, is this one. So it's white to play. So you think that white is doing great because his king is dominating, but black actually has a cute idea. And so his idea is to play, okay, so white plays e4. Black moves somewhere, king f8, say. And then if e5, king e8, and this is just a draw now. So the only way to try to win is to play king d7. And after king f7, white wins, right? e5, king f8, e6. And then black is forced off the pawn, and there's no e9 square to go back to. So I have to go here, and I just promote the pawn. And if e6, again, same thing, king here. And this is a win. Because the pawn is actually on the 5th. So the difference is, remember the position I showed you that was a draw? It was because the pawn was on the 4th. But here this is actually a win, because take king here, king f8, e6, king e8, e7. The pawn is one rank closer. So I can actually just push and just win. Remember, when everything was one rank back, this pawn was here, this king was here, and this king was here, it was a draw. But this is actually a win because the pawn actually just promotes with pawn moves. So that wins. But the way to draw this is something similar to what I showed you before, is to play e5. And now after king anywhere, king d6, king e6, doesn't really matter. Now you just play king e8, because you have to get to e7 in time. So king e8, and then king takes pawn, king e7. And this is exactly what I showed you before. And this is just a draw, because again, the king is one rank closer. So that's a cute little trick. But that actually ties in directly to what I just showed you with my endgame that the guy lost. So yeah, sometimes you have to sacrifice your pawn in order to get your king in a better position. So that's that one. Okay, what other ones can I show you? Okay, here's a cute one. It's kind of related. Okay, so it looks like black's in great shape here because he is closer to the pawns than white is. And it's white's move. So white to move and draw here. And because these are rook pawns, white can draw. And the way to do it is with the paradoxical king d8. The point is, after king f8, black just plays h4, king g7, king f5, king f5. Notice how the king is kind of shouldered. So king h6, king g4, now the king is shouldered, and it's zugzwang. King here. And now, if king h3, king h5 is a draw, because now zugzwang, king takes draw. But instead, here you just play h3. And now white can't get to this magic square f2 in time. It's too long. So king has to move somewhere, king f6, and just king f3, king f5, king g4, king here, oops, king here, and the king can't get to f2 in time. King f3 and then king g1, and this wins. So king f8 doesn't work, even though it looks logical. And a move like h4 is just terrible. Because again, you can't get to the key square in time. You need to get to this square. You can't get there in time. But king d8 works because now, after h4, you just play king c7 and then you just mirror the king. So if king f5, king d6, king here, king here, king here, king here, king here, king here, and this is a draw. Because if the king moves away, king here, you play king g4 and you draw. If the king moves this way, king g4 and you draw. If king h3, you've accomplished the king f2, and now the king is in a cage. And if h3, king f2, and again it's a draw. King h1, king f1, h2, king f2, stalemate. So that doesn't work. So king d8, king f5, trying to get to the pawn. King e7. If king g4 again, king f6, h4, and king e5 is a draw, trying to get to f2 in time. So again, king here, king here, king here, and king f3. Same position as before. Again, if the king moves away, king g4 is a draw, because the pawn is no longer able to be protected. And if h3, king f2 is a draw. So you have to try after king e7, you have to try h4. And now king d6. Again, just trying to get to f2 in time. Because notice you play king f7, you're going the wrong way. And now the king is going to be shouldered off. So king here, h3, same position as before. Black wins, because now he can just go here. But king d6 preserves the draw, king g4, king e5. Now if king f3, you play h3. King here, king here, king here, king here, easy draw, just get back to the corner. And if and if h3, just king e4. And actually now you're winning this pawn, but I mean it's still a draw of course, but now you're actually winning the pawn instead of losing the pawn. So black has to try king h3, and then after king f4, king takes h2 again, you don't go king g4, because now h3 and you're losing, because king f3, king g1 wins. But again, the key move here is to play king f3, and now again the king, exactly the same position as I showed 3 other times. Again, the king can't move, or else you abandon the pawn, and if the pawn pushes, you blocks in the king. So some of those paradoxical moves are what's key, especially when it's a rook pawn. It's more important to have your king able to get to f2 than it is to actually chase the king. So if you look in this position, like the most direct route to f2 in this position is actually to go this way, rather than to go this way. Because, again, the king is going to be always in kind of boxing you out. Whereas if you kind of go circuitous route, it's actually faster because you always have access to the square you need. But again, this is kind of a simple one. And again, with rook pawns on the board, you don't really need to care about, saving your pawn. It's more important just to be able to get to the right square in time. So that one's kind of cute. There's a whole bunch of like rook pawn ones that are all similar. Okay, let's show another tricky one, I guess, which is this one. So we can win this pawn, maybe, but the question is how. So if you count, it takes 1, 2, 3 moves to attack it. 1, 2, 3 moves to defend it. So see if you guys can figure out which move is better. King here or king here? What do you guys think about that one? Did you guys figure it out? King b4, king c3, which one? So king c3 looks more direct, right? Because we're getting to d4. The problem is after king g5, king d4, king f4 is a draw. Because king takes d5, king e3. And if e3, just king f3, and now zugzwang. So the direct route actually is not the right route. And the right route is to play king b4. Because the point is, after king g5, king c5, king f4, now rather than taking the pawn, draw, play king d4. And now king f5, forced. I mean, what else are you going to do? Now this is winning. So again, this is one of those zugzwang positions. So the point is we want king on d4, king on f4 with black to move, not with white to move. So if we do it this way, the problem is we have no way to, whoops. We have no way to waste a move here. So it's king d3, don't forget, king d3, king f5, king d4, king f4, same thing. Black would make a huge mistake by going king f4 right away, king d4, now white wins. But by playing king b4 first, there's no choice. Because if you take here, I just take here and I'm just winning. I'm just going to play e4, e5, e6, e7, e8. So you have to try king f4. And then again, if I take, it's a draw, king e3. But king d4 is the key move. And now black's in zugzwang. So this is one of those tricky zugzwang ones. And so yeah, the right answer is king d4. You guys get that? Yeah, so king b4 was the move. Okay, any questions about anything you've seen so far? I might be doing it kind of quickly, but hopefully you guys are getting the concepts. Any questions? No, it's not. I just showed you why it wasn't. Because king c3, king g5, king d3, I play king f5. King d4, king f4. It's not the same thing. Now it's a draw again. Don't forget I have king f5. I don't have to go here right away. King d3, there's no threat. So I can play king f5, and then king d4, king f4. This is a draw. So that's why it's not the same thing. Don't forget when I play king b4, when I play king b4 and move 1, and I play king c5, I'm threatening this pawn. So ideally you would like to play king f5 and then on king d4 play king f4, but the problem is on king f5 I just take, because I'm threatening a pawn with king c5, whereas with king d3 I'm not threatening a pawn. Okay, so does that make sense to everybody now? Any questions about anything? Okay, so I'll show another really famous study. I'm not going to even let you guys figure it out because it's so famous. I'll just show you the answer. But this is kind of another example of the idea. So this is a super famous one. And I'm sure most of you guys have seen it. So the idea, of course, is that if I play the obvious king to c3 to try to get here, black will play a3. And of course, if you take, it's just a draw, because the king can get back to a8 in time. So for example, king here, 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 and I get to the square, a8, and I just shuffle. Rook pawns are always a draw. And if you don't take, well, if you play b4, I just play king e6, king b3, king d6, king here, king c6. And this is just a draw. King a4, king b6. As long as the king's in front of the pawn, king and pawn endings are always drawn. If the pawn is far enough behind. So this is just a draw. And king c3, a3. You try b3, well, just king e5, b4, king d5. This doesn't change anything. King b3, I can play a2. King takes and just play king c4, king a3, king b5. This is just a draw again. King and pawn against king. So king c3 doesn't work because of this a3 move, which is tricky. And in all variations, it's a draw. So the right way to do it is to get to this pawn, but in a different way. And this king is so far away, the idea is to play king to b1. king to b1. And so the point is that after king e5, king a2, king d5, king a3, king c5, king here, this pawn is still in the second rank. So after king b6, oops, king b6, king b4 wins. Because now we have opposition. We have opposition. Now white's winning because of king a6, king c5, and now we can shepherd the pawn using our king. So king b1, again, a3 is probably the best try. So if we take again, it's a draw. And if we play b4 now, we're not in time. King e5, king a2, king d5, king a3, and king c6, king a4, king b6 draw. The king gets back in time. So after king b1, a3, you can't play b4, you have to play b3. And now after king e5, king a2, king d5, king a3, king c5, king a4, king b6, king b4, and now white wins because his king is in front of black's king and it's black to move. So because of opposition, now no matter where black's king goes, white's king will just outflank it and then push the pawn. So here, king here, and then this pawn's going, and white wins. So you have another example of, you know, how the most direct route isn't necessarily the best one. And the reason is we need to get to a4 as quickly as possible, whilst also outflanking. And the problem is our king takes too long to take the a3 pawn, whereas we can take the a3 pawn very quickly from b1. So that's another. But this is a super famous study, by the way. This is a super famous study. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Kind of want to get away from the king and pawn versus king ones. Let's see. Okay, let's look at this one. This is kind of what Daru was talking about, I guess. Okay. So it's white to move. Who's better, why, and what should be the idea? So I'll let you guys think about this for a few minutes, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, guys. So, this endgame looks really simple, but it's actually very complex. Very complex. Okay. So the first thing to notice in these types of positions in general is that the thing that's the most important is king activity. So both sides are going to be doing nothing but trying to get their kings in optimal position. So it's a question of whether white wants to go this way, or white wants to go this way, or white wants to go this way, or who knows. That's not to be determined yet, but we definitely know white wants to do something like that, and black wants to do something similar, either this way, or this way, or this way, or this way, or something. Some sort of king maneuver. Because leaving your pawns as far back as possible is also important because, first of all, it makes them less likely to be targets. You know, for example, if black were to play c4 and c3, I could just win that pawn, you know, just come and win it. And similarly, by keeping your pawns as far back as possible, you also give yourself potential tempi gains. So, for example, just for the sake of argument, say we did something like this. So now notice how it's kind of like a zugzwang type position. So, you know, black doesn't really want to move his king anywhere because it lets white get in inroads either here or here. And by keeping all the pawns back, it gives you maximum tempi gains. So now, you know, white can play c3 as a free move, white can play a3 as a free move, white can play a4 as a free move, he can play g3, he can play h3, he can play h4, depending. So leaving your pawns back is important. So let's actually see let's go forward a few moves. So king b2, king d7, king b3, trying to kind of fork these, king c6 and king c4. Okay, so this is kind of like the first step. White kind of got his king to 4th rank. Black did his best to meet him and head him off. And now it's time for white to kind of make a pawn move to fix the pawns. So we can always play a4 in one move, but we don't really want to allow f4 necessarily. And if black plays a4, we can always just play a3 ourselves. And so we can always fix this in our favor whenever we want. And similarly, when we play g3, so after king c4, a4. Okay, so yeah, so now in this position as white, again, we could play a3 first, but it doesn't really matter, because we always have this extra move c3 in reserve, if we need it. So we play g3, h6, a3, h5. So now the question is, do we play h4, or do we do something else? Because h4 definitely fixes the pawns. But the question is, do we play h4 here? And so simple counting tells us that h4 actually is not enough. Because after h4, if we just do simple counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's not enough. So king d6, king d5. Remember, black started that sequence, by the way. So king d5, just to defend this pawn, doesn't really matter. Then take king e4, king e4, king b5, king here, a4, king takes, a5, f4, a6, f3, a7, f2, queen, queen. Check. Doesn't really matter to us with check. If the king were here, it doesn't really matter. And this is just a draw. King takes c5, king takes h4, and this is just a draw. So h4 is not enough. So if not h4, then what? And the brilliant move is to play king to d3. Okay, so black is basically in zugzwang. Has to move something. So king d5, c4 check, king e6, And now we want to get to f4. So king e2, king f6, king f2, just gaining some time, king e6, king f3, king f6, and now king f4. So notice how he did a little triangulation. Because if he does, say, king e3 here, king e5, right? So he plays king e2, and then he plays, after king e2, king f6, he plays king f2. So then on king e6, he always wants to have e3 available. So that on king e5, he plays king e3. That's the point. So now king f2, king e6, king f3, and again king e5, king e3. So king f6, and now he gets to f4. So notice how he kind of didn't use this square at all. Because again, so king here. So if king here, and again, not what he wants. But if he ever goes king here, then king here. And then the trick is if king here, simply king here. And then eventually we'll get to the position. So let me show you how it actually happened. So king d2, sorry, king e2, king f6, king f2, king e6, king f3, king f6, king f4, king e6. Okay, now what should white do here? So again, if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that doesn't work, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Check.
And again, it's a draw. If king takes f5, just queen takes a3, draw. So, can't go there. Instead, after king f4, king e6, we play h3. So that after king f6, we play h4, and now it works. King e6, king g5, king e5, king takes, king here, king here, king here, h5 here, h6, c4, h7, and queen. And white wins, because his pawn was on h4, not on h2. But notice that if he plays h4 right away, draw now. So he plays h3, so that he doesn't lose the parity of the opposition. And now his pawn suddenly leaped from h2 to h4 with like everything being identical, and so that extra tempo was enough to win the game. So very cute.